Hello and welcome to the This Works For Me virtual summit. I'm your host, FIRRST Watson. I am the director of the Faculty Development Center at Murray State University. Are you looking for ways for leading online innovation at your institution? Well, our guest today, Dr. Thomas Cavanagh, will be providing us with some strategies to do so. Dr. Cavanagh, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome, and thank you for taking the time to share with us today. Now,
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Sure, happy to. I am Vice Provost for Digital Learning at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. The University of Central Florida is a large school. We have over 70,000 students this fall, 2019, and a good percentage of them are taking online courses. Last year, over 47% of our credit hours were online or blended.
Oh.
So I'm responsible for the units that support online learning, as well as our kind of classroom audiovisual multimedia technology.
And Dr. Cavanagh, I know that you're really being humble with just saying those few things about yourself. You have such a great wealth of experience, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this strategy with you today. And the title of your strategy is Leading Online Innovation at Your Institution, Keeping First Things First. Now, I know we're going to delve into this soon, but tell us, what impressed you to start using this strategy, and how has it worked for you?
Sure. So if people maybe see the title or have seen the article that this is sort of based on, they probably saw that keeping first things first. The first is kind of misspelled. It's a bit of an acronym. So it's all caps, and it has two R's. And we'll get into what that stands for in a minute. But you know, it's interesting. It's not even so much a strategy that intentionally I started using or others started using, but rather it was observations of things that we were already doing. So my co-author in this chapter that we wrote in this book, Kelvin Thompson and I, talked about, well, these are things that we do, and we've observed this, and this has worked for us in the past. And so we captured those practices in this idea of FIRRST, this acronym FIRRST.
How did you come up with, I'm interested in the process, how did you come up with the FIRRST?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you want to come up with something memorable, right? that you won't forget. And you try to fit your observations into an acronym that works, and that one was pretty close.
Okay. All right. So could you tell us about the first paradigm, if you could just delve into it a little bit for us?
Sure. So as I said, it's an FIRRST, and that stands for follow the energy, invent the future, research and make a decision, recognize resource limitations, S is solve the big problems, and T is take action. So each one of those represents a sort of leadership strategy for addressing particular challenges or objectives that you may face in doing online learning, or even sort of leading innovation and technology, educational technology on your campus.
So could you provide us with some examples of these?
Sure. So the first one, follow the energy. One example would be the adaptive learning initiative that we're doing here at UCF. So for the past several years, we've been experimenting with an expanding pilot in adaptive learning, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a technology that personalizes the experience for students, both the instruction and the assessment. It can allow them to accelerate or to maybe get some extra remediation, and it's somewhat dynamic to give them a personal experience. And we've been working really hard to build a team, to work with faculty, to develop our competence in a particular software. And that's worked, but it hasn't really scaled as fast as we would have liked. Meanwhile, in other parts of the campus, other departments have been using different adaptive learning software to accomplish similar goals. For example, the math department was using ALEX in particular. And that's one that I know a lot of people are probably familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we kind of followed the energy. Instead of fighting to try to convince the math department to use this other system that we were using centrally at an enterprise level, we went to them and said, okay, what's working for you? And
Oh.
how can we scoop what you're doing into the overall effort that we're doing? And so we kind of absorbed that into our overall initiative to provide support, to kind of learn from each other. And we didn't try to force them in an area they didn't want to go. So that's what I kind of mean by follow the energy. There was energy already there in the math department doing this thing that was working. What we needed to do was to bring it into the fold so it became part of our larger initiative.
Wow, that's excellent. I like that. You want to
Let
provide
me
another
give you
example?
a couple of others. Sure. The next one is maybe invent the future, which is the I in FIRST. And there are a couple of examples of that. Maybe one is what EDUCAUSE is doing with their next generation digital learning environment, or NGDLE. What they're trying to do is lay out a set of almost requirements for what the next phase in learning management systems might be. And you know, it includes things like interoperability that are really important for us to move forward in what we want in the next generation of online learning. And so they've asked the community to come together and help invent that. So there's been a number of publications about it, and I think that's one at a very large sort of industry-wide level. Maybe something a little closer to home. I look at schools like Arizona State University, or even here in Florida, there's a private school called St. Leo University that we're facing some big decisions. I think Southern New Hampshire University is another example of what kind of institution do they want to be. And St. Leo, for example, has changed the model of who they are. A number of years ago, 20 years ago, they were a school that was just a small liberal arts campus in West Central Florida, kind of rural. I think they had under 1,000 students. And then they decided to go online, and they invented their own future because there wasn't really a path for them at that time. And now they're one of the largest, I think, Catholic schools in the country because of their online enrollment that has helped to fund initiatives on campus. And if you look at what Southern New Hampshire has done, it's something very similar. They've been able to really increase their footprint on campus, even by going online. And then, you know, Arizona State University, there's been a lot of publicity about what they've done with totally changing the paradigm of how they're delivering education. They've got over 100,000 students there now, including their online population. It's quite remarkable.
Wow. Do you have any other examples?
Sure, I can keep going all day. Maybe I'll jump to recognize resource limitations, which is the second R in FIRST. And nobody has all the resources that they need, right, to do what you need to do. So how can you be creative in accomplishing goals within the limitations that you have? And so one example that we do here is we have 3 times a year, once every semester, summer, fall, and spring, what we call Hack Day. And we give the staff 24 hours to work on whatever they want, any project that they want. And they have a big event the next day where they all share what they did. And it's amazing the work that comes out of just 24 hours of concentrated effort in anything that you want to work on. And in many cases, we're able to just implement what people have done in that 24-hour period, or with a little extra work, implement something that makes a real difference for us. And even if it's not something that you can implement, it ends up really helping the staff by giving them time to learn something new, or to try something without really consequences, and experiment. And there have been some really clever things that have come out of this process. And it's not always programming, although the programming team tends to kind of dominate and to coordinate this. But one time, the group that came in second, because everybody kind of votes on who did the best job and they get stickers and things. The group that came in second was the administration team, who cleaned out and reorganized the supply closet. That was a Hack Day project, which I thought was great. One time somebody cleaned the golf cart that we used to get around campus. It was just long overdue, believe me. But most of them are sort of clever kind of programming solutions. But it's an amazing way to get an awful lot done in a really short amount of time. And basically all it costs is bagels, you know, for the
So let me see if I understand you correctly. They have the opportunity to do anything that day, and at the end of the day, they share what they did.
Actually, they all sort of meet in the morning on the first day, and then they come back the morning of the next day. So they have that 24 hours to spend as much time on it as they want. But the idea is that they have to present something the next day, even if it's, here's what I learned, or hey, I tried this and it didn't work, and that's happened a few times. And there's value in that too.
Wow, thanks. How about solving the big problems?
Yeah, solving the big problems. This is one I talk about a lot. When you're trying to lead innovation, a lot of times you're asking for funding or you're trying to gain executive support for what you're doing. And what I have found is it's way more effective to try to tie the institution's objectives to your solutions. Instead of saying, hey, I don't know, whatever it is, build X number of new online classes this year. Okay, great. But what does that do for the institution? Well, if you tie it to, well, we can enroll X number of new students if it's an access solution, or we can save this amount of money for students if it's a financial solution. Look at what your president is measured on. Look at what your board of trustees are measured on. If you're a state institution, if it's related to performance funding like we have here in Florida, tie the work that you're doing to the institution's problems, to your president's problems. And suddenly what you're doing becomes a lot more important if you can make yourself a solution for the president's problems. And that's what I mean by sort of solve the big problems. Don't measure yourself by your own metrics. Try to measure yourself by the institution's metrics.
I like that. And as you said, we could go on this for the entire day, but let's move on to taking action.
Sure. Yeah, that's the last one. That's the T of FIRST. And you know, sometimes you have to do something, right? Not doing something is a choice. And even if you don't have all the data that you need in order to make a decision, sometimes you still have to make a decision. There's a quote that I heard one time that decisions are what leaders make when all the data don't present themselves. So sometimes you have to kind of take all the information you have, recognize that it's incomplete, and then still make a decision to do something. So one area that we've been working on here where that might fall into that category is badges, digital badges. And I know some schools have had great success in that area and that are way ahead of us in that. But for us, it's been a big deal, trying to convince people, trying to get them on board with digital badges. And I think there's still a there with digital badges. And it's something that we've made some commitment towards, even though we haven't really had the return. We're making a bit of a bet, like we have with adaptive learning, that this is going to help us in the future.
So I think that sounds nice theoretically, and I know, like, from your experience, you probably have a little bit more confidence to make these big decisions. But how do you really make it when the information is incomplete, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying don't have any data, right? You need to have some data. You need to have as much as you can get. But I've also seen cases of, you know, the analysis paralysis, where we're just going to keep studying this until we have every answer. And that basically ends up being a de facto decision to do nothing. If you just have nothing but committees to look at this, and you never have enough data to make yourself completely confident that the result is going to be, you know, what you predict or what you hope for. If all you had to do was make decisions based on data that told you what to do, you wouldn't need leaders. You kind of just need managers that can just do what the data tell them to do. So it needs to be data informed, but you also have to recognize that sometimes you're in areas that are new and cutting edge, things like adaptive learning that are not always going to have a mature set of information that you can base your decisions on. So some of it is going to have an element of risk associated with it, and you have to have a pretty high tolerance for that kind of risk. Be as informed as you can, but ultimately make a decision, because if you don't, that's a decision.
Wow. And I think a lot of people don't see that as a decision, not making a decision. We just see that as the safe path. I imagine that the process of you making decisions under these circumstances, it became more and more comfortable to you as you made more and more of these types of decisions, right?
Yeah, and it helps to have the right culture, right, at your institution. If you're in a culture where if you are not 100% successful, you suffer negative consequences, you're not going to be encouraged to take those kinds of calculated risks.
Yes.
So that's really important. I think you need to have a culture where you feel empowered and a little safe to make some calculated risks. Even if they don't pan out, you're not going to get fired or yelled at or something like that. Now, you can't be frivolous or really, careless in your decisions, because especially at a public institution, we're kind of stewards of the public money. We want to be good stewards of that. But I think that if you have a good institutional culture, it goes a long way in having you feel that kind of empowerment to make those kinds of decisions.
Exactly, I agree. So would you say that this FIRRST tool is a leadership tool or a management tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that maybe I implied sort of an answer earlier. I would call it more of a leadership tool, a way of thinking about leadership and leadership decisions and different strategies, because management is more about implementation. And I think leadership is more about setting a goal and maybe giving people the tools and resources, but not necessarily telling them always how to do it. And that was a hard transition for me as I moved into more leadership rather than management roles. Letting people decide their own way of doing things, delegating that, and setting an objective and holding people accountable, and making sure that you're making progress and giving them the resources to be successful, but not telling them exactly how to do it, because I know how I would do it, right? It's hard to. So I think that this is more of a tool for letting you be a leader in that way, and thinking about what your strategic objectives might be.
Wow. And what would you say to someone who resonate with what you have shared today, but they're still a little bit hesitant? What would be some first steps that they could take?
Yeah, maybe think about what you're trying to accomplish and where you sort of fit in the leadership hierarchy, because maybe there are ways to do this in a small scale, and maybe do it on a project team. You can apply a lot of these on just a project team level, and it's a lot less risky than if you're talking about a college or something within a university. So start small, take some calculated risks. And don't be afraid to get outside your comfort zone a little bit, because that's where growth happens. You're not going to grow and develop by playing it safe. So this gives you some structure within which you can stretch yourself a little bit, without trying to do it without a map, I guess.
I like that. I had to write that down. You won't grow and develop if you keep playing it safe. I wish there was a formula to get people out of their comfort zone in this, because it's easier to say than to do.
Yeah, and you have to want to be a leader, right? And it's not for everybody, and that's okay. There are technical paths where you become the technical expert, and that's just as valuable as somebody who might be leading the team. So you kind of have to know where you're comfortable and what your goals and objectives are in your own career. But if you do want to follow more of a leadership path, then you're going to have to stretch, and you're going to have to try some things, and you're going to have to make some mistakes. And this is maybe a way to kind of structure that journey a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for telling us that. And I think what you have shared today will give people the assurance that, yes, people like you are making decisions not because you have all the answers, not because you're 100% sure about what's going to happen. So you're giving us the understanding that, yes, you have to make decisions whether or not you have all the evidence. So thanks for reminding us of that.
Yeah, by no means do I know. I make plenty of mistakes. I
Yeah.
don't talk about them a lot on, on public video interviews, but I've got a long list of them.
I know. So are there any resources that you'd like to recommend for our viewers to review?
Yeah, and I'll provide them to you. But there was as I mentioned, this was captured. This heuristic, this FIRST, FIRRST heuristic, is captured in a book chapter. So I can send you a link to that, and it goes into a lot more detail with a lot more examples and some references and citations.
Mm-hmm.
And then I co-host a podcast with my co-author of this chapter, Kelvin Thompson, called Topcast, the Teaching Online Podcast, and we did an episode on this FIRST heuristic that also goes into a lot more detail. We spent about a half an hour sort of digging through it and explaining it. So if people are interested in hearing a little bit more about it, that might be of interest.
Excellent. And viewers, I will be linking to those resources in the video description below, so please check them out. And Dr. Cavanagh, would you leave our viewers with an encouragement or a challenge?
All right, let's try an encouragement. That is a challenge. You can get out of your comfort zone. You can stretch. And it's important to do so because, as I said, you're not going to grow if you don't. So I would encourage you to try that, and I would challenge you to do it because even if you're not in a leadership role, if you're in one of those technical roles, you're still going to try things. You're going to want to try things that you don't know if you can do. And that's the only way you find out if you can. And if you don't quite hit the mark, usually you learn why, and then you're able to do it the next time. So definitely, stretch. Don't play it too safe. I always say to my staff here, I want everybody to be just slightly uncomfortable, but in a good way, right? And not to a way where people are stressed or are not happy, but in a way where we're just slightly reaching so that we're stretching and we're improving. Because if you're not always improving, you're gonna get stale and you're not gonna be learning new things.
Well said. Well, Dr. Cavanagh, you have shared with us some very practical strategies today, and I'll be checking out the resources. And viewers, I encourage you to share this episode with others. And Dr. Cavanagh, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. And our viewers, we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of this virtual summit. See you soon.